Hello! Welcome to DnDTime Talks, where we discuss all things Dungeons & Dragons. I am one of the Dungeons & Dragons boys, Pete.
And I'm Jeremy.
Jeremy.
It sounds
like there was something, a deep, dark secret that you just revealed, that you are, in fact, Jeremy.
No. That's not my deep, dark secret.
Okay. Any clues, any hints for all of the people following along on the DnDTime Talks storyline?
Lemons.
Okay. You'll have to ponder over that in the forums for the next couple weeks. But in the meantime, how are you doing? How are you doing, Jeremy?
Oh, I'm doing great, Pete. How are you?
I'm doing good.
I'm glad to be home. It's been a busy day today. A busy day.
Yes, we were worried that Jeremy would not make it, and it would have just been DnDTime Talk. It would not have been a plural. It would have just been me talking. But I'm glad that we're here together to do it. I see we got people hanging out. We got Bionic Sheba. Thank you very much, Sheba, for the 225 bits. We very much appreciate it. And also I see the Forgotten One. I see Psychopath, Raventail. Hello, Imagination Studio. I am unfamiliar with your name, but welcome. It is good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see all of you folks hanging out. Welcome again to DnDTime Talks. For those unfamiliar, this is a stream where Pete, myself, and you, the chat, all talk about random things Dungeons and Dragons. I botched that. Tonight we're going to talk about starting a campaign, though.
That's pretty excited about this one. Yeah, that's a big topic. Like last time, we're ambitious with our last couple of weeks' topics.
I don't know if this one's going to be this is probably not going to be a one-episoder, but, it's going to be a something. So, I don't know. It's going to be good.
We'll see. Do you want to just hop right into it?
Yeah, I mean, as always, if you all have anything to say throughout the conversation, feel free to type in chat, and we'll mention it here and bring it up. We love good conversation, so don't be afraid. Wisdom of the crowd is often the greatest wisdom there is, or it's just complete psychosis. But we're gonna hope it's wise.
Usually it finds somewhere in between those two.
Somewhere in between. Yeah, exactly. And if you have a subject you want us to talk about in the future, hit us up either on Twitter or a little easier on our Discord server. Links below the stream. Let's dive into the topic. Pete, you want to start us off?
Yes. So today we're going to be getting. When I wrote this, I always write little write-ups for our stuff, and I thought this was going to be a narrower topic than I immediately realized it was. So I used the word to describe this topic as granular. It is very much not that. It is a huge topic, but we're going to be talking about running your very first session of a long-form campaign. So, if you're new to DMing, this is going to be a conversation for you. If you've been wanting to, I saw Raventail saying that you're wanting to DM for over a year and still haven't gotten up and put anything together. Yeah, that's probably the exact thing that we're going to be talking about is yes, well, there's a lot of pressure for DMs, so we're going to be talking about some tricks and stuff to overcome that pressure and just going over how to get in and to create a first session that is memorable and interesting for your players.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obvious why we're talking about this. This is an incredibly important topic. Being able to start off a campaign with a really exciting kind of start that can motivate players, excite people, get people interested in what's going on in the world, and inform them to what game you're trying to run is really, really important. I mean, that last part, I said it last, but it's arguably the most important. The number of times I've either started or played in a game where I had no idea what was really even supposed to be going on until a ways into it.
Yeah,
that is very frequent. If this is you, if you've ever played in a game or run a game where your players have been a little confused for a little bit, it's a common thing and you want to try and avoid it.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about some ways to help kind of get over that
initial
that hump without just expositing to the players for hours, which most people, I'm not gonna say no one wants, but most people don't.
Yeah,
some people would love it.
I'll get to this now because this is a thing I wrote in bold later on. But as we're getting into more and more specific advice, Everything that we talk about is a guideline. These are our own personal ideas and tricks, and nothing that we say is going to work for everyone. Nothing that we say is going to be perfect for every game. And if if we say something that directly contradicts, well, I did that and it was awesome. Well, then that's great. If it works, then it's good.
Yeah, like people were saying, every group is unique, every group is different, and the more you DM as a dungeon master, the more you DM for a group, and as a player, the more you play with the same people and with the same dungeon master, the more you all learn to feed off each other's creativity in a positive way. You learn what works for you, what doesn't. So this is a starting point, right? This is your starting your first campaign or a campaign. So yeah, super exciting. Players, dungeon masters alike. There's a lot to learn here. Stay tuned.
Farfel says, I take everything Pete and Jeremy say as law, and when it fails, I blame them and shake a stick at the sky angrily as I curse their names.
That's interesting, Farfel. I've never heard you angrily shake a stick at the sky. Does that mean we're perfect?
We are. No, he probably just does it in his free time.
Shit.
There's just like every moment we're not talking to him.
You would hear him no matter where we were.
That could be the case. Either way, let's start getting into it. So one thing that we're not going to talk about, but that bears repeating because we've talked about it before, is a session zero. And a session zero is, we did a whole talks on this, so if you're interested in learning a little bit more about how to run one of these and what our thoughts on that are, watch that VOD or video on YouTube. Is it up on YouTube, Jeremy?
Maybe. I hope so.
It could be. If it's not, then ignore my previous statement.
Pete, you gotta check this before you say it, man.
I do not know. I just assumed. But who could say for sure? But basically, what a session zero.
Throwing me to the goddamn wolves.
It could be. Who knows? If it's not there, like I said, just ask us also, and we'd be happy to talk about D&D at length. What it is a session where you get together with your players and DM before the campaign actually begins, where you just talk about what you want out of the campaign. You players will build characters together, they'll discuss their expectations, things like how much combat's going to be in the game, how much role-playing, if there are any homebrew rules. The DM will speak a little bit about their setting and kind of what they had planned for. The world is generally a major point of a session zero, where you get kind of all of the things to get everyone on the same page of a campaign done in a session zero, and it's a session in which you don't actually play the game. It's a preface to playing, and you just get ready to play. So some of the advice we'll give will kind of assume that, for one thing, you have information that you would learn about characters in a session zero, and just kind of a session zero is a good idea, and I recommend it for most games. But we're not going to talk about that probably any more than that, unless you have anything you want to add on it, Jeremy.
No, it's just a great creative way to start stuff off. Looks like it's not on YouTube. Thank you, Pete.
Oh well, it exists.
We might need to re-record that at some point.
Maybe we'll do it again. It's a blessing because we've gained the ability to get a free topic out of thin air, which we thought we had already done.
Yeah, or we'll just find the old video and re-upload it. One of the other things. Anywho, let's move on from that. So you've had your session zero. People have made characters. And during that session zero, as a dungeon master, you've kind of factually laid out to your parties, to your players, what the obvious factions in the world are. So they have an understanding that their character, whoever they are, would know about the world. So they'd know, if there is a king of the Great Kingdom, they know who the king of the Great Kingdom is, because everyone in the Great Kingdom knows the king of the Great Kingdom. Why did I call it that? If there is a mafia-like evil organization run by, I don't know, giant fly people, and everyone knows about them, the players know about them, their characters know about them. So they know about these important factions in the world, and they know who they are, right? So one of your characters decides, I want to be a ranger. And in session zero, your players kind of discuss, and one of the other players is like, oh, I want to be a fighter. One of the other players says, oh, I want to be a rogue. And together they decide, all right, we're mercenaries, and we go from town to town hunting monsters that threaten the town. Pretty much the most standard, we're murder hobo adventurers, the most basic adventuring party you got, right? We guard caravans and hunt monsters in the forest for townspeople. Super straightforward. your players have decided. Now, the real question from here is, well, how do you start that off, right? Because your players have come up with a theme, right? They are adventurers, part of an adventuring party that does basic adventuring stuff. And now you have to start the game. So,
Yes.
you know, you can do the very classic start in a tavern kind of deal, but there can be a lot more finesse to it than in the first session, you really want to set a good groundwork, because you've explained what the factions are. The players have decided their characters. But until you actually start that game, the tone might not be apparent, right? So you want to establish the tone. Is the king of the great kingdom actually an oppressive tyrant? Are the people in the towns miserable? Right? These are things you want to keep in mind and try to get across in that very first session. Maybe you describe the darkness in the sky in the town, the overall sense of dreariness and drudgery with which the people, and all that kind of stuff. If you're running a module, well, usually the module will kind of explain the tone of a place as soon as you get there.
And if you're running a module, a lot of the times they'll just directly kind of tell you how to start your campaign. They'll tell you literally exactly, even down to the very language that you should use to start your campaign. I know that it does that. Yes, can use. But I think most people tend to when they're using it from the book.
Yeah.
I know, the starter adventure, for example, Lost Mines of Phandelver, literally has read these 2 paragraphs to your players to get them into the first, moment of your game, and that's their start, which is a perfectly valid way to start a campaign, and might be a way that fits your style or the game that you want to play. And we'll go over some more of these in greater detail in a bit, some of the different tricks you can use to dive in. But I think really the core goal of any first session is to have it be fun, which seems obvious, but really you just want to make a session that is going to be memorable and that makes your players want to keep playing your campaign. Because I don't know, for me at least, that was the big fear the first time I ever DM'd. It was like, man, I don't know if I have, tons of notes and lots of ideas about the future of it, but I don't know if what I have and put in front of them is going to be something that they're actually going to want to do and commit to for week after week after week. And I think that's a lot of the stress, at least for me, in, starting out and really trying to come into my own as a DM for the first time when I started playing.
Yep. And just to build on that, don't come into the first session with tons and tons and tons of notes. Have pretty sparse notes.
Yes.
You want ideas, like I said, for the factions. You want an idea of what their first kind of encounter is going to be, because if they're first starting out, the first encounter, you're going to railroad them into it. It's the first thing. They don't have any context to make decisions at that point. You have to do that. So, don't be afraid to just railroad them into the first encounter in the first session. And then also don't be afraid, if they don't like it, to totally change direction.
Yeah, that's that's just a great DMing tool in general, not being afraid of pivoting.
So yeah, in that first game, right? You take your first game, you get in, they're in this town by the tavern, and giants attack the town, right? Right there, what you're doing is you're showing the players what the game is about. In that very first campaign, giants in the very first session, if giants attack the town, you are establishing that giants are going to be a threat in this game. You don't just throw a random encounter in, especially a big one, in your first session, unless you're trying to show something with it. And that might be a really great way to start, a Storm King's Thunder. A
game comparable to Storm King's Thunder, yes.
Yeah, or Against the Giants if you're playing something from Tales from the Yawning Portal or some other module. Sorry, go ahead.
What I was going to say is that doesn't mean that the thing that you do in the first session has to define what the game is going to be about. For example, if you have giants attack in the first session, that doesn't necessarily mean that the campaign has to be about giants. But what it means is that there should be some it shouldn't be just like a random party of giants coming in and choosing to attack a town. There should be some underlying reason that makes the players want to investigate and learn about why it is that the giants are attacking these towns. That the first session, should ask questions that the players would then be inspired to go and find answers to, one way or the other. Because maybe it's because they're being rooted out of their homeland by this big dragon villain that you have planned, and they learn about that. It doesn't, have to correlate one-to-one, but there should be reasoning behind it.
Exactly, right. And the NPCs that show up in your very first session should know something, right? They should have some basic knowledge of whatever threat or encounter you put up. So in this example of the giants, right, the random townspeople, after the players defend against the giants, hopefully, the random townspeople should know why the giants came, or at least know where they came from. So the townspeople might say, yes, the giants have been raiding us for the last few weeks from the north. And that's the extent of what the townspeople know, but that now gives the player something to bite onto and explore further. Now, sometimes players totally take you for a loop even in that first session, and they just run away from the giants and the town gets destroyed. But in that case, have
a few giant stragglers that are kind of separated from the pack scouting. Maybe they encounter the players there. And even though they're running away and not engaging in the way that you want them to, they still have this threat of dealing with the attack because it's directly imposed upon them.
Yeah, so you don't have to totally force the immediate thing upon them, but you should kind of lay clearly what your goal is. And in this case, it's to establish that the giants are some pivotal force, right, in the world at the moment. Maybe it's the tyranny of the king of the great kingdom, like I mentioned earlier, right? And one of the things that you notice is the royal guard are executing people in the street for petty crime or something, inability to pay their taxes or what have you. Establish that tone. And those are very different tones, right? Monsters attacking versus the tyrannical king is executing people in the street. Very different tone. And it's important to use this first adventure, first episode, whatever you want to call it, to establish that tone. Because you might say in your session 0, all right, guys, we're going for a darker tone for this one. But, until the guard drags some child out of their house kicking and screaming because their parents didn't pay a thing and then cuts their parents down in the street, there's that tone of, oh my God, this is brutal, this is awful, this world is horrible, doesn't sink into the player.
Yes, absolutely. I agree 100%. You have to, there's that, on paper saying that you have a dark tone is one thing, but then the visceral actually seeing it really will let it sink home and come across for players, which is, and I think those are really the three big, showing what the game's going to be about, setting that tone, and getting to meet your actual players and having them introduce their characters. Those are kind of the three pillars of running your first session, and the three things that you really want to focus on and that you hope to get across in that kind of time frame that you have to begin with. But to distract for a minute, Fox in the Box has an awesome question in chat that I'd like to talk about for a second, Jeremy, which is, they say, I know for me, at least as a newish DM, I get very nervous about DMing to the point where I almost don't want to play. Is this normal? Is there a way to help this feeling? And to start with the, is this normal? Yeah, absolutely. I think it's extremely rare to see someone who says that they aren't nervous the first time that they DM. I think even if they say they aren't nervous, they're probably not being at least 100% honest. I think everyone has some jitters and some questions regardless of how comfortable they are with performance, because really DMing at its core is a performance art. You're getting up in front of people, you're acting, you're doing silly voices if that's something that you want to do. You're kind of making yourself a little bit vulnerable in a lot of ways, because you're presenting a story that you've in your mind created, and now people are just reacting to it in real time, and that's absolutely something that is normal to be nervous about. Is there a way to help the feeling? Well, that's kind of the trick. For one thing, I saw Shiba saying that it gets better with time, and the more that you play, you just kind of get more used to that, and I definitely agree with that. Jeremy, do you have any particular tricks that you use to get over nervousness? I'm trying to think right now about what I would personally do. But
I think it super depends on how you're playing, right? This is, I mean, this could go down a whole other rabbit hole, but I think it's worth taking the time to talk about because this is your first campaign we're talking about, right?
yes,
Starting starting a campaign, not even necessarily your first, but like if you're playing in person is a very different scenario than if you're playing online.
that
Is
is
a
true.
very different scenario than if you're playing online with people you don't know very intimately. Like if you're playing with people that you see every week and you've hung out with these people for years and you know them, you've grown up with them and they're, great friends of yours, DMing for the first time for them is going to be a lot different than DMing for the first time with a group of random people, or maybe not even random people, but just even in D&D time, right? They're folks maybe you've played with one or two times in Pete and Jeremy. And that can still be real stressful and real scary. And what it really comes down to is when you're scared about that kind of thing, when you're nervous, you have to ask yourself, you have to stop, right? Take a moment, step back, and try and look at how you're feeling from an objective standpoint. And think, why am I nervous? Why am I anxious right now? And when you can answer that question, then you can solve the problem. You can figure out why and you can deal with it. So if you're anxious because you're afraid people won't like your game, right? If that's the answer that you come to, that's why I'm nervous. Well, figure out how you deal with that, right? Maybe the answer, your solution all along is, I don't care if they don't like my game. That's, I'm here to play D&D, and if they don't have fun, they don't have fun. Whatever. I do my best. Yeah.
Yeah.
If your answer isn't that that they won't like my game, if your answer is more just they won't like me, well, obviously they like you because they're taking hours out of their day to sit down and play a game, like an intimate role-playing game.
That's a great point.
With you. So
they've already made the choice.
You might be thinking that maybe you're anxious, maybe you've got some self-doubt, but you got to think like, obviously they don't dislike me, otherwise they wouldn't be here. You don't go and dedicate 3 to 4 hours of your day on a presumably recurring basis for a campaign with someone that you don't like. That's not how people work. And a lot of it, I feel like it's in your head, right? You're just anxious that, oh my God, I'm not going to do a good job. I'm not going to do X, Y, or Z. And what it comes down to is there's no good job in D&D. There are great dungeon masters. You can watch Adam Coble. You can watch Matt Mercer. You can watch all these fantastic dungeon masters. Which, by the way, if you don't know those two dungeon masters, Critical Role and Roleplay, look them up on YouTube. They're great.
Absolutely.
But you can have objectively great dungeon masters like that, but they're not great dungeon masters. They're great storytellers, and they're great because they've done it a ton. That's just tons of experience.
At the end of the day, I think with anything, it's going to come down to practice and experience will always kind of dull that nervousness.
Chris Perkins is amazing.
Chris Perkins is fine because
he's my favorite. I love Chris Perkins.
It's so tough to pick.
Well, you're wrong if you don't love Chris Perkins.
I love Chris Perkins, but I don't know if I'd pick him as my favorite. But he's incredible. I would almost like to just spend a whole talk someday, Jeremy, as a slight side tangent, just talking about DMs and their styles and what we like about them and what we don't. I think that'd actually be a really interesting talk.
I completely agree, but I see another great comment in the chat. I'm sorry, Pete, you have something you wanted to say, though.
I got distracted. I think the thing I was going to say was that practice dulls the nervousness. I thought you had some really awesome points, Jeremy, about, they're already there, and that already shows that they want to be engaged. And when they come back the next week, that means that we had fun and we want to keep doing the thing that we're doing, which is another sign that, you're doing well. And I think you can really take heart and really find some kind of, some inspiration in the fact that, these people are coming here to listen to me tell a story week after week. That means I must be doing at least something right. That's awesome
and that's
advice.
the thing. You only have to do something right. You don't have to do everything right. You can't do everything right. You're a person. You're flawed. Deal with it. That's how people are. You can't fix you. You can't change who you are. You might try, but you'll never succeed because that's just not how people work. Like, when you dungeon master, obviously, if your players are not engaging with the story, then you can adjust the story a little bit. Maybe they're not into the kind of game you want to run, the tone of the game you want to run. That doesn't make it bad. It just makes it not for them. But far and away, for the most part, even if you have issues with the way someone's DMing, or you have an issue with a very specific thing going on, like I saw Raventail Black Talon say in chat, always ask for feedback from your players.
Yep.
And, I actually don't agree with that.
I agree with that, actually.
I do to a degree, right? Ask for it, but that doesn't mean act on it. Listen to what your players have to say, but if your players seem like they're having a good time and they're coming back and they seem like they're excited to play, then you're doing it right. Like,
I like
you don't have to be nitpicking and looking for faults, because sometimes it's just fun to hang out with your friends. At least that's my personal.
I'm looking at Farfel13's comment. I DM for Jeremy. Jeremy is honest, sometimes brutally so.
Yep,
Feedback is easy.
I am a complete asshole.
I have gotten brutal feedback from Jeremy for a D&D campaign before. And sometimes it's what you want, but sometimes it's not what you want. It seems like those hard truths as a DM are like, yeah, I want to hear about it. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's actually you just want to play and do the best that you can. And really, it's just about having fun and looking at yourself objectively and how you're DMing and trying to grow. But Farfel13, I mean,
I will burn that support group to the ground, boys.
You're not obviously, Jeremy. You're not invited. Maybe Farfel. But yeah, I think Ivalon says open communication is important, and Rex said that as well. I absolutely agree. I think it's very important.
Anywho, let's I think move on to the next topic.
As we're kind of sliding back in, so I think this ties in pretty well. As we're talking about how to kind of be less nervous, odds are if you're looking to DM, you've probably played before. If you're going in fresh as a DM for the first time, power to you. That is a brave move, and I have a lot of respect for you. But usually people play before they DM, and if you're nervous, then that means you're probably at least comfortable being a player, which means you're comfortable role-playing and acting and saying, describing things that characters do. So you've at least gained comfort in that regard. Most of the time, that nervousness starts to fade as the session goes on and you play more. So these are a few tricks that I want to talk about just to, in the very first moments of your game, getting into it and just starting to talk and starting to role-play and getting the engine moving so you start to feel more and more comfortable, like D&D icebreakers, so to speak. And everyone, I think, uses some of these to greater or lesser extents, and they're just good little tricks to start to make everyone feel comfortable and really just start, playing in the space and start having fun. And the first and probably the most classic of these is, as you start and get around the table and sit everyone down, you just ask everyone to go around and introduce who their characters are. If it's the DM, you can kind of direct it. You can point at people and have them go around, the circle. If you're, online, direct it in some other way, and just have everyone talk about it. Even if you did a session 0, it's a good reminder, a good helpful way to just get everyone talking and start to break the ice, to start to feel comfortable playing and RPing in a space.
Yeah, and I mean a great example, right? Let's say you're taking the classic start in a tavern example. When you sit down, everyone's hanging out, laughing, making jokes, and you're going to start the campaign. Everyone sits down. They're going to start the first session. Everyone's all excited. They all look at you anxiously, and you start to freak out. The easiest thing to do is take that off yourself, right?
Yeah.
Take the pressure off yourself to talk and say, all right, you're in a tavern in a small backwater town. You, player, what is your character doing? what do they look like, and how are they relaxing on a rainy evening in this tavern? And right there, you've just taken all of the duress off yourself. It's not your stress anymore. It's now your player to describe how their character's acting, because they know how their character's acting. They've got an idea. They've probably been thinking about this character probably since session 0, nonstop, because they're real excited to play Dungeons and Dragons, at least in my experience. And it's a really great way to start those introductions, letting the players just set their own scene. You give them the basic rainy night in a tavern, backwater town. What are you doing?
Yeah, I love putting the sort of improv prompt with that question, because then they're not only just describing their character, they're in the process now of thinking creatively. They're actually getting into the gear of storytelling directly, because when they say something along the lines of, oh yes, my character's a really heavy drinker, so he's probably sitting over in the corner just into his third glass tonight, already starting to get a little bit of a buzz on this evening, and now they're thinking about the world and thinking about how their character would fit into it, which is also just a great way for players to really start getting into the space, and it's comfortable and it's usually pretty easy. That stuff, I find, anytime I've used it, has gone well and smoothly.
Well, and one of the best parts about that, like Pete was saying, it starts that storytelling. It starts those storytelling juices a flowing.
Oh yeah,
because already, in session 0, your characters have decided, oh, we're a mercenary company, and my character likes getting drunk, and my character is like a ranger who's all woodsy. And then you get into that first describe what your character's doing, and one of the characters says, yep, I'm just kind of sitting alone at the tavern, at the bar, sipping on a very large flask of ale, and there are like 7 empty flasks, flagons around, and they set a scene of, oh wow, your character's really, like, my character likes getting drunk is different than I sit alone at a tavern at the bar and get annihilated. The other character, the ranger, is, yes, I'm sitting in a chair by the fire whittling arrows, right? It sets a really interesting scene and gives players hooks to kind of interact with each other too. So I highly, highly recommend, especially if you're nervous, giving that freedom to your players to describe who their characters are.
I agree, and this is a thing that I've done a couple of times to varying degrees of success as one last kind of option. And this is kind of starting a game in media res, and if you're nervous, I think this is a really awesome way to start a campaign. And that is by beginning it just in the middle of the action with they just start the campaign and you just say something like, you're fighting a giant. Like, it can be that simple. And have them go through this battle with a giant, because combat is generally a lot more comfortable for DMs to run than anything else. Role-playing and exploration and describing environments and places, that's where a lot of the nuance and tricks of being a DM come in. But having a giant and rolling dice and everyone using all their mechanics, that stuff is fun, and it is pretty easy and low strain on the DM. It's very much like running a character, but you're just, running a different style of stat block. And it can give you a lot more time to slowly dip your toes into the water of playing. And then you have this fun moment afterwards where you tell the players why they were doing what they were doing as you really start to get into the thick of RPing.
Yeah, Raventail saying I wouldn't recommend starting in combat if you have new players in the group. Maybe.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if you have new players, sometimes they'll be floundering around with the combat, not understanding it totally, and that's going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
Whether it's the first or like the last thing, they're going to be a little confused. And odds are, if you have new players, they're also going to be confused with the role playing. So honestly, I still think it's, to each their own, right? Your party better than any Peter or I ever could, but I would still recommend it in person. And
I like it too, obviously.
If you're looking for a really great dungeon master with a great example of this kind of beginning in the thick of the action on media res, I recommend, again, Adam Coble. He's excellent with that, right? He likes to describe things very cinematically. The camera fades from darkness, and you see below you an empty cobblestone street with 3 adventurers standing heroically in the path of a towering, slobbering giant, right? the giant roars with anger and rushes forward, and we roll for initiative. And the players are like, whoa! You know, like, what happened? We're fighting a giant immediately? And, you know, it's this, like, dramatic kind of cinematic intro.
Oh, yeah.
Helps to give the players, like, I see exactly what's going on, right? But anyway, I think it's just a really cool, I'd say gimmick, but not even gimmick. It's a really excellent tool.
It's a tool
that I recommend.
That's what I would do. That's what I would call it as well. It's a tool. And so, yeah. You know, we touched on this earlier, and D&D, you know, obviously it's collaborative storytelling is the point of the game, but that assumes that the players don't really have the ability to really make the story more collaborative. Oh, I bumped my mic. I hope that wasn't too loud. At the beginning of the game, because they don't know the world, they don't know what they're doing. So as DM, you're gonna be, you know, just putting them in situations and telling them what to do. And the first of those is probably going to be your starting location, which is where I would put almost all of my effort as a DM if I was doing prep work for the game, is fleshing out the very, very first area that they're going to begin in, and whatever encounter is going to initiate from that location. That's where I put almost all of my prep work, except for very, very kind of broad strokes world stuff that I know I want to do down the road, or, you know, start kind of seeding now. So, Jeremy, want to talk a bit about just starting locations in general?
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned it a couple times here, and I'm sure this isn't the last time we will say it on the stream. You start in a tavern. It is arguably the most iconic starting location in Dungeons and Dragons.
I wouldn't even say arguably. I would just say it is.
Yeah. And there's it's good and bad. It's bad because it can be just, you start in a tavern, and then the dungeon master sits there confused, like, why aren't you role playing? You're in a tavern. And then everyone's just confused and no one's doing anything.
Yeah.
Or you can take it the next step. All right, so you start in a tavern. Describe, can each of you just tell me what you look like, what armor you're wearing, where you're sitting, what you're doing in this tavern, on this rainy summer evening. And, you know, that starts things going really well. And then you can jump into the action. As you're all sitting there doing this, an Etten crashes through the wall wielding hammers. And he's like, what the fuck is an Etten? And then you show them the picture of the Etten from the monster manual, and they're like, oh, I ran away. You know,
I do not fight that. And that's interesting. Running away from an Etten is such an interesting start of the campaign. Because I'm firmly of the belief, and I think you're on at least a comparable vein, Jeremy, I really think that a campaign should start humble. I don't think that you should start off with these huge, ambitious, like, you know, in the first session, your heroes shouldn't be slaying a dragon, probably. Yeah. And things like running away from an Etten are a really memorable beginning to a journey, because then later on, when they go back and roust the Etten from where it has made a little base for itself in the ruined tavern, that's going to be a sign of, we have improved as heroes and we have become greater as a result. And also, that's it. They'll get this feeling that, like, oh, we were weak and now we have grown stronger. And it gives you more room in the future to really scale things up and slowly escalate over the start of the campaign. If you start too intense, then you don't give yourself much room to grow into the future.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to start, like, with a bang, right? You can start it with a little more nuance, right? A dark figure wearing a black cloak enters the tavern. He takes a few steps forward and begins a hushed conversation with the barkeep. And the players don't do anything, or maybe they do something. If they don't do anything, you say, after a few moments, he turns to walk away. But a halfling comes and stabs him in the back. And, right, he crumples to the ground. Right, and you start this dramatic, like, whoa, something's going on. You start with some kind of something to interact. Or maybe the players go and talk to this character, this hushed, shadowy figure, and that is their first kind of adventure hook. And they describe, yes, I am the Watcher of the Wood, or something. You know,
the Watcher of the Wood was a good miscellaneous fantasy thing for a mysterious NPC to be, Jeremy. That was nice and fun.
Just pull that one out.
Keep that one. That's probably the best thing you could start with, is something called the Watcher of the Wood. So that's the number one, and then, you know, everything else we talk about will be somewhere underneath that.
Let's talk about some other great starting locations, though, because we've talked about the tavern.
Well,
What are some
the thing
other,
about the tavern, if I could say one thing on the subject of taverns, to me, the starting location that you pick is going to be very indicative of what kind of story you want to tell. And I think the tavern is the perfect setting for the sandbox game to begin with, because if your players know that they want to be in this kind of choose your own adventure, very, Lucy, just go wherever you want kind of game, a tavern is sort of a microcosm of that type of game. It is a place where there's just a bunch of people meeting around and talking, and your players can walk around and interact and find their own way and figure out what they want to do. And if that's what you're wanting to go with, I think a tavern is an awesome place to start.
Agreed. I absolutely agree. But there are some other great ways to start, too. Some other great places. So another
The prison
place,
is a classic.
Yeah, the prison is a pretty iconic one. Nothing starts off a campaign and sets a tone like you are all in jail.
Yes.
And it's just like, oh shit. Well, what kind of jail? So you describe, all right, you have been captured by drow in the Underdark. Maybe you are traveling through the night with guarding a caravan and were knocked unconscious. And apparently have now woken up underground. Maybe you were exploring the Underdark. The Dungeon Master can set that scene, just arbitrarily decide based on probably what they talked about in session. Tying it back in. And yeah, you are prisoners. You have no armor. How do you escape? Right? You have no armor, no weapons. And this is now a dramatic, shit. Are there any other prisoners we can talk to? Because that's the first question they'll ask. Who else is in the prison? What is around me? And these are questions that they'll ask. They're not going to not ask. And so by knowing what they're going to ask, as a Dungeon Master, you can prepare for that. And then you look like a Dungeon Master god, because it's like, oh my God, everything I asked them, they have an answer for, and it's perfect. My God. And as a Dungeon Master, you're like, yeah.
I did write 5 phrases for them.
For certain. I'm improving everything from my sheets of paper. Yeah, I mean, Out of the Abyss actually starts exactly like that.
Great.
Or maybe you're in prison of the king in the Great Kingdom, and you ask the players, the Great King is a tyrannical man who rules with an iron fist, arresting or even killing those unable to pay for something as little as being unable to pay their tax. And you ask them, what are you all in jail for?
That's such a fun question to get to answer as a player.
Oh, if you can set your first game up with asking the question to them, it's great, right? Especially for the lawful good characters. But I'm lawful good. It's like, well, obviously you did something that was too good for the king, right? What was it? Did you try and help an innocent person who was being unjustly, bullied?
Yeah.
Or what
that situation is the perfect opportunity for a character like that to show off how lawful they are, and how much their good has gotten in the way of the king's good. I love the prison start.
I love Marvel's comment in chat. Oh yes, I'm improving everything right now, right here, written down for me to improv real quick.
That's very good. And as a DM, never let them see you. Never tell them. Never admit that you weren't improvising every single thing that came up unless they already know. Even afterwards, when they were like, so I mean, you totally knew that was going to happen, right? Or like when you pretended like you were rolling a dice for an outcome you already knew was going to happen. Yeah. And they go, so what were the other options on the dice? I guess you'll never know.
Yeah, always roll the dice. If you're playing in person and you have a DM screen, always roll dice. Doesn't matter what dice they are. Just if players say they're going to do something, even if you totally expected it and you know exactly what the answer is, just roll a die, look at it. Maybe if you have some papers, look at the papers.
Oh yeah.
And then tell them what happens. And your papers are blank, or maybe they got scribbles on them. It doesn't matter. It's the illusion, right? That you have crafted this amazing world and you're prepared for everything. So much of Dungeons and Dragons is the illusion of being
it's actually very important. Like more so than I think it seems like we're joking, but it's actually Well, I know, but I think it sounds like a joke. I just want to be clear that that's actually something very important, is creating, as a DM, is creating this illusion that you understand exactly what is going on in the world around you. That is also, I think, even worth a whole talk on the facade that is DMing a game.
And then, of course, there's our last kind of starting place.
Yes,
so we've got, you start in a prison, which you can be captured by bad guys, ambiguously bad guys, or maybe good guys. Like, you've just been... That's an interesting one. I haven't done that one yet. You've been captured by good guys mistakenly. What did you do that mistakenly got you arrested? Amazing.
I looked like one-eyed.
Or you were framed, right? That's another great one. Damn. Yeah. But anyway, the last kind of iconic start is on the road, right? You're guarding a caravan. I mentioned it earlier, mention it again. You start out on some kind of a mission, or maybe you are simply wandering the countryside. And this is, I think, a little more difficult to start than either the other two, as the kind of... I don't know. I feel like there's less to interact with you. You know what I mean?
There's less to interact with. My thought on the road start is that this is the start that you want if you just want to get right into the action. If you're doing the on the road start, odds are you have an encounter plan that's going to happen immediately. They get ambushed by, something. They meet a strange caravan of odd travelers peddling wares that seem very inexpensive for what they are. And
horrible mist surrounds you.
Yes, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a strange kingdom with a big vampire lord, or any other very classic on the road opening. But that's really the you want to get right into the nitty gritty of it with that choice and that style.
The thing I would highly recommend for on the road, if you're going to start with that, make sure you know where they're going. So, like, if you start with on the road and your players are like, you've got your adventuring party, right? And they're the classic adventurers we were talking about this whole time. They're just mercenaries. Say you're heading to a big city to find work. Just set that scene. Don't be like, you're just wandering for no reason. Yeah. Give them some kind of motivation, right? As to why they're trying to get where they're going. Especially if something happens that'll take them off that course. Because giving the characters the motivation to want to get back on the course will give them at least some kind of internal conflict when they're investigating and going after. They might run.
The last campaign I ran actually was kind of also the first campaign I ran in a lot of ways. And the way I started it, oh yeah, I see that. The way I started that game was I actually just told people, you're trying to get to this city on the other side of the continent. You have a month to get there for when the big festival at this place is. Walk across the world. That was the start of that campaign, mostly because I wanted to work on improvising and I didn't plan anything across the world, but also just to give them this overarching driving force to keep them wanting to move forward and explore new places rather than get too granular stuck in one location. And that's just a good little trick that you can have in the old quiver, is just give them a place and a time frame, or some piece of information like that will keep them moving in a direction where plot happens over the course of the start of your campaign.
I completely agree. Give them that kind of motivation.
Yeah.
So, where are we at now?
Well, I think this is the thing I want to talk about next, is what I think actually might even be the most important thing of the first session, which is weird that we're getting to it now, as it's getting kind of far in, but also we've had some great tangents and some really awesome comments in chat that we've spent time on, so I'm totally fine with that. But that is introducing the characters and really getting your characters engaged in the game, giving them a chance to shine. I'm of the opinion that in the first session, you should have something planned where every character gets a chance to do the thing that their character was made to do, or show off the aspect of the character that is most important to them. For example, one of your players, let's say they're playing a dwarf. and you know that they really love the dwarven culture, and they've read all of the lore in Morgan King's Tome of Foes about dwarves, and they really want to work with some of that information. Give them another dwarf, either from their clan or a different clan that might have slightly different views than them in the first session, to butt heads with or agree with very strongly on certain points, or just interact with, so they get to show off those aspects of their character that they like. Every character has those idiosyncrasies that you can, that you can get involved with. And to answer your question, Luminarian, I'm not going to chug today. I did that the one time, just for you, Luminarian, but it will be a long time before that happens again. And by that, I mean at least 6 months. I will say arbitrarily right now.
Yeah, so I mean, give those characters their opportunity to shine, right? If you have that ranger and you're out in the woods, or if they're following a monster, have there be tracks for them to follow. If you have the rogue, mention that, your sneaky pickpockety rogue, mention the jingling money bags on the flamboyant noble who walks into the tavern looking for adventurers. Play these kind of games. Give them the thing that lets them shine and see how they react to it. Because you might assume that because the player's playing a rogue, they're going to want to pickpocket everyone. But if they don't, well, you've just learned a lesson. That's not what they're interested in doing. And that's fine. You can play a rogue without stealing everyone's purse every 2 seconds. And another thing that I would mention, we were talking about NPCs. Especially when it comes to, we'll talk about establishing bad guys in a little bit. We'll come back to this. I don't want to get too off course.
I was just going to say, great comment from Raventail. And for God's sakes, if there's a pretty female character, don't have every NPC flirt with her. Yes, please don't do that. Yeah, that's not cool. Just be cool. For once, be cool if you were thinking about doing that.
Yeah, that's not cool, man.
Yeah,
and here's the thing: if your DM does that, just take a minute and be like, "Hey, man, I'm not cool with this."
Yeah,
no, that's not how this works.
Or stop playing in that game.
Not every character in the world is gonna catcall you from the side of their wagon. Some people are normal, decent human beings in the universe. But yeah,
that sucks.
Don't be afraid to be frank.
Agreed.
Anyway, so yeah, let's move on to the actual adventure. Actually, we've talked a lot about the very first couple minutes.
Those are
what about the
very
rest of
important
the
minutes.
First section?
I'd say doesn't matter. Do whatever.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's actually how I feel about it. It's just kind of do something. You get attacked by goblins. Whatever. Make sure there's a reason behind it. Make sure. If they're getting attacked by goblins, it's because there's a goblin overlord off in the distance that's rallying his forces, and now has decided to strike the local town because he thinks he has gained enough mass to actually overcome the guard. Or have some reason for whatever that you have happening. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, there are no random encounters in the first episode. You can pretend there are. You can roll some dice and pretend they're random, but there are no random encounters in the first adventure. Indeed. Or they're really, unless you're in your first game, there are no random encounters. There are goblins. There are going to be goblins. Nothing the players can do, even if the players immediately hear there are goblins and decide, guys, what we're going to do is we're going to get everyone in town to pitch in some food, and we're going to broker a peace deal with these goblins. And you know what? That's fine. And then the goblins try and steal their food, even though they're going to give the food to the goblins. Well, they don't speak goblin, so they're going to fight the goddamn goblin. It's okay to do that. But that being said, I kind of like the idea of brokering a peace deal with the goblins. That's not the point. The point is,
fun.
Have a plan, stick with it, and it'll be fine.
In terms of the amount of content, I guess it depends on how long you're going to play. But I would definitely give the players something that they can accomplish in the first session. So I think if you just do nothing and just kind of do a lot of talking and expositing in the first session, that people will feel like they just well, that like they just didn't do anything and that no progress was made. You want there to be some milestone that they can say that they completed. Like they were told by someone, go get this book from the library, and they do that. Or they were told by someone, or there's a goblin attack and they defeat the incoming band of goblins and they've won a battle. They have done something in this session. So I think that is important.
This all ties into probably the biggest thing you want to accomplish, right? Assuming you've gone through the checklist so far, you've engaged your players in some way, they're interested in what's going on, they have gotten a chance to show off who their character is and what they can do and what they're good at. They're having a pretty good time. So next you want to seed some story elements. The first session's the best way to start that. First impressions mean a lot. Your first game, your first adventure, your first week on a campaign is your first impression. So if you have important story elements like the giants I ham-fisted in earlier, great, perfect, you're done. You can make sure those show up, and that's an important story element. Another cool way of doing this is if you're establishing NPCs, non-player characters, you can mention them, but mention them after all the players have had some time to explain and, you know, get in touch and like interact and describe their characters. Don't start off the adventure by describing your awesome barkeep NPC.
Agreed.
As excited as you might be about them, start the adventure off describing the characters, the players. NPCs should never outshine player characters. With rare exceptions.
Yeah.
They might be more powerful, but they shouldn't feel
more important.
They shouldn't be belittling your player character, right?
Agreed.
If one of your players is a wizard, you shouldn't have like a first level wizard. You shouldn't have the 5th level wizard NPC hang out and travel and fight with the party, because that first level wizard is gonna feel like a sack of crap. They're just gonna feel weak as shit next to this way better wizard.
Man, fireball is way better than firebolt.
However, there's an exception to this rule, and that is starting off the game. One of your players is a first level paladin. They're all excited to get to 3rd level and eventually get their oath because they've read everything there is to read about the paladin monster manual. And they're like, oh my god, I get all this cool stuff. And then you have this other paladin NPC who shows up about half. You have him show up like halfway through, or her, or whoever. Doesn't really matter. They're gonna die. So you have this NPC show up halfway through and offer to adventure with the party to help them on whatever quest. And you know, the party is like, okay, sure, because they don't know what to do. It's the first thing. You show up and the players have fought one small band of goblins, and they had a rough time. Then the second small band of goblins come up and they trash them because this higher level paladin NPC annihilates them, and it's awesome. And they're like, wow, that guy's so cool. And your paladin player's like, yeah, I guess that's okay. And they're like, wow, this is great. The paladin's like, yes, we must travel forward to the next part, the Ettin's lair. And they go into the Ettin's lair, and the first thing that happens in the fight is the Ettin grabs that paladin and rips his arms off. And then the player's like, ah! And they know, oh my god, he's so much more powerful than he got trashed. And they run away. And it's great. So if
that seems like a personal experience, Jared.
It's not actually.
Oh, really?
It's something I've really wanted to do. I love killing NPCs, and my players hate it. I'm sorry.
Really want to rip some arms off, huh, Jeremy?
He had 1 week until retirement. Exactly, Roger. Why?
That's
exactly.
Funny. I guess one last thing is we're kind of rounding down. That's very good, Jeremy. One last thing is,
so it's an awesome way to like.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
On the subject of kind of seeding story elements, be careful about overdoing it on that. You do not want to sit there and exposit to your characters about all the crazy lore stuff that's happening in your world. Do that maybe a little bit during session 0, but you don't want to roll into session 1 and just spend the first however telling them about the intricate machinations of like the political instability within the various governments and how all of these people sitting in your tavern represent these different factions and interplay with each other. It's better off to just kind of, show that stuff and let them figure it out slowly over time. You don't want to just, force that on characters right from the beginning. Personally, I think you should really focus on one big element of your story that you want to get across, maybe, one or two in the first session.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's the kind of deal, going back on what Pete just said, right? If you have all these factions and they all act in certain ways and feel certain ways about each other, don't tell your players just bluntly, oh, these are all the factions, this is how they precisely feel. Show them, like Pete just said. The best way for players to understand that the King of the Great Kingdom is a tyrant isn't to tell them the King of the Great Kingdom is a tyrant. It's to watch the King of the Great Kingdom's royal guard start killing
a thief in the street.
Yeah, like an orphan who's stealing bread. They cut his hands off in the street so he can't steal it. Right? That is how you see, oh my God, these are horrible. Right? That's how you set that up. You show, don't tell.
Roger Twice says, don't start the campaign with a non-interactive cutscene. I mostly agree.
God, cutscenes in a campaign. That's something where, we have a whole episode about. Jeez.
I think there are scenes that you can set up that are basically cutscenes that are okay, because the situation happening is too difficult for the party to interact with. But never just to say that a thing happens and don't let the party interact with it is kind of my opinion. And yeah, you shouldn't do that, Luminarian, for more reasons than one.
Yeah, that's a different. Boundaries is a whole different topic.
Yeah.
But regardless, thank you, everyone. We're just about wrapped up tonight. But thank you, everyone who hung out and stopped by. We hope that what we talked about tonight has been helpful for you all. I guess, Pete, if you had one takeaway from tonight's talk, what would it be? Your number one thing? I know mine. You want me to start?
Yeah, you go first. Give me a second.
I think my number one thing from tonight is do not be afraid. You're going to be afraid for your first game, but just remind yourself, I shouldn't be afraid. You got nothing to be afraid of. Everyone who's there to play the game is there to play the game. They like you enough to spend hours of their time with you and commit an indefinite number of ongoing weeks playing with you. So they don't hate you, and they're excited to play D&D, and they trust you to run a good game, and you're probably going to run a great game. Your biggest enemy is always you. Your biggest critic is always you. And if they have a real problem, they'll tell you about it. So don't worry about it. Have fun. That's what we're all there for.
Agreed. That's
also very good don't trust old men in dungeons. Raventail Black Talon.
Nice.
True. Very true.
That is a very good takeaway. I'm gonna go. I guess I'll go since you went with the
short end of the stick here, Pete.
Yeah, since you took the best takeaway from this, I will take a more D&D focused takeaway in terms of running the game, and that is that you should really focus on your players. The whole point of a first session is to make sure your players have fun and make sure that the things that you do and the world that you build and the cool things you create don't take the stage over the cool things that your players do and the interactions they have. I think that's a really important. I think that's very important, is making sure that you focus on your players above all else.
I completely agree. I guess that's about it then.
You stole the best. You stole the best takeaway. I guess that's fair because you said you want me to go first, and I could have taken it, but
you could have taken it, Pete.
Yeah, I guess it's my own fault. Never mind.
I lobbed you the underhand softball right there, and you.
I chose to lob it back to you.
Softballs really fast.
It depends on a lot of factors. Thank you all very much for watching. Thank you all very much for watching Pete and Jeremy's DnDTime Talks. It's not the name of the show, but just the last two words that I said of that. Thank you all for watching DnDTime Talks. We love you all. This is a good conversation tonight. I think we got a lot of good talking in. I feel good.
Don't be afraid to check out Pete and Jeremy's D&D Time this Friday. We have a special event this Friday, Labor Day. I'm actually really excited about it. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun.
Yeah, It's Labor Day.
And I think this is your last time you can possibly sign up. Friday's game is right now.
You have
Or
but moments.
anytime before midnight Pacific.
Act or inact. Either one is fine. But if you don't act, then you won't be able to get into the game on Friday, which we hope to see y'all there. Psychopath asks, what is Labor Day? It is
American and Canadian holiday.
Also a Canadian thing, yeah.
Yeah. Don't worry about it. It's not important for the event.
Really? Yeah. That's funny.
Right.
That's really funny that is actually...
You don't have to know anything about Labor Day.
Yeah, you'll be fine.
All right, everybody. I'm Jeremy.
And I'm Pete. And this is DnDTime
Talks. Take care, everyone.
It's the deadline for wearing white.
All right, good night.